You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. And we have an interesting edition today. We have two repeat guests, but they're going to talk about something new that they have created in the Frederick area of the biohealth capital region. And it's nice to have them both here again. We have Dr. Jeffrey Hausfeld, who's the chairman and board and chief medical officer of BioFactura, which we have talked about before, and Darryl Sampey, who's the president and chief executive officer of a brand new division of BioFactura, Capitol Biologics. So Jeffrey and Darryl, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you so much, Rich.
Great to have you again, and we're excited to hear about the news of something that is a new division and spin out from BioFactura. And I'm going to ask both of you before we get into talking about what a CDMO is, which Capitol Biologics is, to have Dr. Hausfeld and Darryl both introduce themselves to the listeners again. So we'll start with Dr. Hausfeld.
I am a retired surgeon. Did my training at Yale in otolaryngology, facial plastic, and reconstructive surgery. Practiced in the DC area for about 23 years. Went back and got an MBA at Hopkins, followed by a degree of organizational development at George Washington University. Left my practice to become a full-time entrepreneur. That led me to develop and operate assisted living facilities for Alzheimer's and dementia care patients in the Midwest. And by doing that, I learned very quickly that physicians are very smart and can make a good living in their practice, but we're not quite as brilliant when it comes time to commercializing new ideas. So I started a non-for-profit organization called the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which now has 38,000 LinkedIn members worldwide. And it was at a soap-related event that I met Darryl about a dozen years ago when he started talking about biosimilars. And we have been managing the company and growing it since that time.
So once you got the entrepreneurial bug, it has not left you yet, right, Jeff?
That is correct.
Okay. Darryl, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Darryl Sampey. I am one of the original founders of BioFactura, which was about 22 years ago, and I've been running the company ever since. My background is chemical engineering, and I have a Ph.D. in bioengineering from University of Maryland. Built the whole thing from scratch to where it is today in the state of Maryland, and the company has scaled from a handful of people to, as at the beginning of last year, up to 45 full-time employees with capability to take biologic drugs and some vaccines from proof of concept all the way into first-in-human clinical trials. So all of the process development, method development, and all the things that you have to do to get the FDA to allow a clinical trial, we do. That is my background.
Yeah, thank you, Darryl. Now, when you mentioned BioFactura and what it does with drugs, before we get into Capitol Biologics, which is related, do you do all of this work for your own drugs or other people's drugs with BioFactura?
So BioFactura has been developing its own products for probably the last 10 or 12 years since Jeff and I met. We've been working on biosimilars, which are generic biologics. Two of those have advanced, one through a very successful phase 1 pivotal clinical trial demonstrating biosimilarity. That was manufactured and conducted completely in-house at BioFactura. We also have been involved in developing medical countermeasures for biodefense for the U.S. government, really since the inception of the company. More recently, back in 2019, we got a $78 million prime contract from BARDA to develop our product, which is a therapy for smallpox, for active infection. And that has moved right up to manufacturing that product for a first-in-human study. Haven't started that yet. So the answer is we built the company on our own products over the years and bringing those products into phase 1, first-in-human studies along those lines. And with Capitol Biologics, what we're looking to do is take what we've built and apply that to others' programs in commercial space. We're still looking at government opportunities as well because we've been doing work with the government for a long time. So far, doing pretty well, bringing in those new clients and getting their programs moving typically towards that first-in-human study or supporting clinical trials that are being planned and taking them down the line.
So thank you for that evolution. But it's mentioned that Capitol Biologics is your personalized CDMO partner. And probably a lot of our listeners might have not heard of the term CDMO. So I'm going to ask you, Darryl, and Jeff to explain CDMO and how that became a division of BioFactura and basically how you transferred what you were doing internally to support people externally.
Jeff, I'll let you start with that.
A CDMO is a contract development and manufacturing organization. And at BioFactura, we soon realized that when we bring our own internal products to a certain point, they would have to be manufactured at a larger commercial scale facility. So for a while, we have been thinking of branching out and using this machine that we have built that has fantastic scientists and wonderful state-of-the-art machinery and scientific equipment to biotech companies that don't have this level of sophistication. We recognize that small companies work on complex biologics, but they don't have the internal CMC, the analytical, the quality, the manufacturing infrastructure that they need. So if they're looking for a scientist-led, US-based, collaborative CDMO that really is a problem-solving organization that uses phase-appropriate execution, that's the gap that we fill.
And basically, you're trying to differentiate yourself from the large commercial scale CDMOs by doing something more personalized for these emerging companies. Is that correct?
Because of where we came from. We are entrepreneurs to begin with. We didn't start this company as a CDMO. The company really was working on its internal products and continues to do some of that. But as a CDMO, we understand the entrepreneurial mindset, which is something you won't find most times in large CDMO structures. So that's what we bring to the table, and that's the culture that we bring to, so that we understand time, money, efficiency, and rework are big problems and issues that we have to be able to address as partners with our clients.
And when you looked at identifying your capabilities and strengths and the gap that you saw that existed, did you see that as a gap that existed within the biohealth capital region in Maryland, D.C., or Virginia, or did you see that as a national gap that you wanted to address?
So definitely on some here and some nationally. We have clients and partners that are across the nation. As Jeff mentioned, we are applying all of our lessons learned over 2+ decades of developing our own products to hopefully assist people in navigating the very complex path to a first-in-human study, both on the technical, the regulatory, the funding, the budgeting, the pacing. All of this is just critical. There's so many points of failure along the way that you've got to try to avoid. We hope to bring a lot of those lessons learned to the clients that we bring into the company.
Yeah, so picking up on that, what do you look at as the types of companies that are the best fit for Capitol Biologics? And generally, where are they in their own development life cycle?
We have a number of different companies, from very early stage companies, startups, to a couple of public companies we've been working with that need assistance in bringing a new product that they just acquired, maybe through some out license from big pharma that needs to be restarted. We've got a couple where the product has been sitting in storage, say, for a couple of years, and they want to figure out, can we use this product in a new clinical trial? And so a lot of that is along the lines of analytical and quality control and stability testing that we do. It is a variety, but I think at the end of the day, those early stage startup companies that are ready and perhaps have raised or are raising a Series A round to take that path to the first in human, those are typically the best clients because we really can offer them an end-to-end solution to get them successfully into that phase one and into that clinical development path that they need to be, that really is a major value inflection for their company and their path, hopefully, to some partnership exit next step for their company.
So, Jeff, basically, if I'm a CEO or a CMC leader for one of these companies that might be one of your targets, what are the questions that I should be asking before I make a decision to select a CDMO partner?
So I think this is a good question because what the CEO of the company really has to ask is, first of all, what do they need? What are their goals? And in what time frame do they need it? So do they need a cell line development? Do they need upstream process optimization? Do they need downstream process optimization? Do they need analytics? Do they need a QC system? Do they need a regulatory assistance? What is it that they need? Why do they need it? And when do they need it? And what do they have? Do they have an antibody, a recombinant protein, a glycoprotein, a biosimilar, a cell therapy, a gene therapy? And is it a match to a specific CDMO? What is that CDMO's history of working in that field? What is their culture of working with another company, whether it's venture-backed or private-backed or backed by a strategic? And what is their philosophy in terms of tech transfer and making sure that the work that gets done is done in an efficient fashion that would allow them to do their IND enabling or their phase one or their first in human study?
And basically, I think that you guys describe what you do as an integrated biologics development process. And what does that really mean when you look at going from cell line development and process development through analytics, QC, and early GMP manufacturing, Darryl?
It means thinking about the end goal at the very beginning and thinking about the FDA or other regulators at the very beginning of cell line development and process development. We really do integrate all of the different elements that are required to get you to GMP manufacturing, clinical manufacturing at the outset, with even in some cases where you're screening, and this is a new thing that we've been bringing to the market, where you're screening maybe different candidates and still haven't chosen your final drug candidate. We offer, even in the screening process, the platform that will be used for commercial manufacturing at the end of the day, and thinking about that launch of your product to the commercial space, even at the screening point of the drug candidates you might choose to take down the line. And all of that is integrated with the cell line, with the analytical development needed for QC and stability testing, all requirements, obviously, for getting a product into humans and to the market. And then all of the product or the process development, thinking about cost of goods. This is a huge one in biologics. These are typically very expensive molecules, but there's a tremendous pressure to bring down those costs so that even an innovator product is priced in a way that can get into that market and that can get the reimbursement that it needs to get. We're starting to see that. Products that used to cost $10,000 or $20,000 are now $500 to $1,000. And so those prices are coming down because people are putting together these innovations in manufacturing that bring down that cost and allow for pricing that's a lot better than it used to be.
And you're trying to build those cost savings into your process so you can pass it on to your clients, I'm sure.
At the very beginning.
Great. And Jeff, basically before a company commits major capital to the GMP manufacturing or clinical supply, how can developability assessment help determine whether they are advancing the right molecule, expression system, and development model?
So this ties in very well to your last question and Darryl's answer in terms of how we're looking at the process from its inception. Because one of the most expensive mistakes that an early stage biotech company makes is advancing a molecule that later proves to be difficult to either manufacture, purify, formulate, stabilize, or characterize. So we are providing this early developability assessment to help confirm whether or not you have a working model of an asset before this program moves into the more complex and expensive stages of development. Especially important if you're venture-backed or grant-funded, because you have to preserve that capital and you have to hit value-creating milestones and you have to do it efficiently, and this is the way to do it. So what do we look for? We look for safety and immunogenicity risks. We look for binding performance. We look for manufacturability, purification behavior, formulation feasibility, stability, as well as critical quality attributes. And all of those things, if done early enough, can give you a hint whether or not this is the right asset. Now, I am a biotech investor. I want my company to know from the get-go that they're working on the right molecule. Because if they don't, they'll be spending millions of dollars only to find out in the latter stages of development that, gee, there was a problem here that we could have found out if we did three things. If you did an in silico examination of the protein, if you did predictive analysis, and now with machine learning and AI, you can do sequence liabilities, folding risks, exposed residues, immunogenicity risks, post-land translational modifications, and manufacturability concerns. And then you take that and you do in vitro analysis. You do high-resolution analytical characterization, binding, glycan analysis, purity, aggregation, charge variance. All of those things give us a picture as to what and how this molecule will react. And then we do small-scale in-practice use experiments, milligram to gram level production and purification in small scales, accelerated stability, forced degradation, freeze-thaw evaluation, and all of this early process behavior gives us not only data, but good science. Developability is what I say is where science protects capital. And that's how we have to think about it. You have to move quickly, but you have to move the right asset forward and know the right system so that your program is successful in the end.
And as a biotech investor, Jeff, I would imagine preservation of capital is extremely important for emerging biotech companies.
That's why this, to me, is a no-brainer, is in that if I have to spend a small amount of money for a developability assessment, that's the first thing I want my company to do, so I know that we're on the right track.
And we're speaking with Dr. Jeffrey Hausfeld, who's the chairman of the board of BioFactura, and Darryl Sampey, also a founder of Bactura, but now the president and CEO of the Capitol Biologics division of BioFactura. So, Darryl, why should early stage companies pay close attention to analytical characterization before they reach the clinic?
So, BioFactura's, the parent company of Capitol Biologics, did a lot of work in developing biosimilars, which is highly reliant on analytical comparability and characterization. We've built out at the company a suite of high-resolution analytical methods that we can apply to novel products as well as biosimilars that will allow you to look at the molecule, how we're manufacturing it, how it may interact with the human body, the immune system, early on with analytical methods that we already have in place, that we've already developed, so they don't have to be developed from scratch again for new products. And those methods can, as Jeff was mentioning, help predict whether a molecule is going to function as anticipated in that first in human study. So that's part of why analytics are so important in the early part of selecting your drug candidate after maybe an in silico developability assessment, as Jeff was mentioning. We then get down to, say, 10 different possible candidates that we can manufacture at very small scale, but in the same system as eventually the commercial production of these products. So it's highly relevant to the end product. And then test all of those in analytical methods that will help you make that decision to choose your drug candidate and move it forward. And then as you're developing a process to manufacture it and scale it up, keeping an eye on those critical quality attributes that are important to the efficacy, the safety, the potency of the molecule once it does get into that first in human study and beyond. So analytics are significantly important from the very early screening stage to obviously the release of the product by QC and the stability of the product. We begin building those methods or adapting the platform methods that we already have developed at very early stages of working with our clients.
This is a focus of ours primarily because we are a biosimilar company and we did the development of biosimilar assets where you need to have a very exacting and high characterization of these molecules to make sure that they are analytically comparable to the reference product. But what we found is that even with our early stage novel drug companies, these analytical assays are critical in determining if there is a problem or how we can mitigate a potential problem moving forward.
You're both talking a little bit about what you see as a differential advantage or a proprietary advantage that Capitol Biologics might have, but it's a very competitive market. So what makes your expression platform and development approach different from the standard outsourcing model?
BioFactura has a range of different expression systems, cell lines, if you will, that we can utilize to produce biological drugs. We have a patented proprietary system called StableFast that is an NS0 based system, which has been valuable to a number of biosimilars developers that we've been able to bring in under contract with Capitol Biologics, as well as innovative products that tend to use this platform for its characteristics in how it interacts with the immune system. So there's an opportunity where we're looking at right now where a company has already developed cell lines in NS0 and need to preserve that. And that's one of the areas that I think we're incredibly unique in the world at doing. No one else is into that cell line. We have, since last several years, gotten involved with developing a CHO platform. So CHO or CHO is the typical platform of choice for commercial products, monoclonal antibodies, and other protein-based therapeutics. And we have a CHO platform called CHO Vantage that is owned by Thermo Fisher Scientific that we were a co-developer, a beta tester for last year that allowed them to bring this to market early in April of this year. And so that platform is very useful, again, in the screening of new candidates and also the scale up and manufacture of them as well. So we have a number of different ways of bringing molecules to that first in human study, imparting the characteristics of the platform to the molecule as necessary for its function and its efficacy at the end of the day. And so I think having that suite of platforms at our fingertips offers what a lot of CDMOs don't have.
One of the other things that's very important for a CDMO and Capitol Biologics is, how do you balance speed, flexibility, and close collaboration with phase-appropriate quality and GMP discipline?
So again, this is a lot of lessons learned in developing our own products, and not just developing our own products, but building our company from less than 10 people to over 40 people. and building our capability from early development to phase 1 and now phase 2 GMP manufacturing. So we learned along the way where to incrementally add the quality elements necessary, or maybe a little with a safety margin, a little beyond what's the bottom line necessary, so that you're balancing cost, because quality costs money. It does. That's a lot of review, a lot of personnel as you start moving from R&D to IND enabling, which we usually call GLP level quality, and then into GMP quality for the first in human study. But that's phase 1 GMP quality, which is a certain level in that spectrum of GMP quality as it moves eventually to commercial, which is at the highest level and the most expensive as well. So it is that balance that we've experienced over 2 decades of building the company and developing our own products that we can bring to our clients, so they're not spending too much money early, but they're spending enough and they're doing the right thing as they move the product, so they don't run into problems as they get that into that first in human study.
As Darryl said, as a product-related company, we had to use CDMOs many times during our own journey. And a lot of times it was not a pleasant experience, whether it was slowness, bureaucracy, lack of communication, delays, being left in queues, cost, rework, all those things that are things that we have learned. And we understand that those are not optimal conditions. And we try very hard not to reproduce them. And we try even harder to make sure that our client understands, yes, quality costs money. Here's how we can manage that cost, yet produce a quality product.
Thank you, Jeff. I think that this has been a very good educational primer for the listeners who have not used a CDMO or are thinking about using a CDMO. But at what point in a company's life cycle should they start talking with Capitol Biologics? And what are the key triggers that suggest it's time to engage with a CDMO?
Well, certainly we want them to come to us before their CMC path is fully locked. So that's ideally in the preclinical, IND enabling, pre-IND, early phase 1 planning. That's the best time for them to come to us. If they're venture backed or grant funded or government funded or partner backed, anywhere from seed through Series C are the companies that usually will come to see us. And they usually have very lean teams, but they have a real program and a real budget and real near-term development milestones that need to be met. Those are the times that we want to see that. So if there's been a recent financing, a grant award, a planned pre-IND meeting, a first GMP batch that's needed in the next 6 to 18 months, or planning a phase 1 clinical study. Those are the times we want to see them. Or if their own CDMO is either too slow, too rigid, too expensive, weak in analytics, or terrible at tech transfer, that's another good time for them to come knocking at our door. What we don't want them to do is wait until the IND package is due in a month from now, or the GMP slot is urgently needed. Our value is really when we can help shape the program from cell line development through process and analytical and quality and manufacturing strategy. And we do it early enough to avoid the rework that you see happen many times and drive up the cost of development.
One of the interesting things you mentioned, you're a biotech investor, Jeff. You probably thought with Darryl it was a good time to create this new division of BioFactura, the Capitol Biologics division. But how do you see this U.S.-based biologics development and manufacturing capacity evolving as we go forward, especially for those emerging biotech and government-aligned programs?
There's an increasing need for domestic development and manufacturing partners that can provide speed, transparency, supply chain resilience, and easier technical access than if you were working offshore. So a lot of companies don't just need a bioreactor. They need everything. They need cell line development. They need upstream and downstream. processing, they need analytical, they need phase-appropriate quality oversight. And these smaller companies lack that in-house CMC, QA, QC manufacturing teams that are needed here onshore. They need a partner that can help them move that from concept through the IND enabling work, and not just have someone who can make big bioreactor vats of material for U.S. consumption. So they're looking at a more holistic approach with a U.S. partner that has an integrated development, analytical, quality plan, not only large volume commercial production. So we're evolving toward a more resilient, technically integrated, phase-appropriate model. And for emerging biotechs and government-aligned programs, the winning partner is not only the largest CDMO on the block, but the one that can combine development expertise, analytical depth, quality, and discipline to the process.
I would add to that innovation. We're seeing a lot of funding. You mentioned the government, a lot of funding going into advanced manufacturing development. And that is to bring the cost of goods down, is a big part of that, but also to shorten the timelines, to develop processes that are very flexible so that they can be easily transferred from one facility to another in the United States, usually with the government-backed programs. And we are seeing now US-located large-scale, commercial-scale manufacturers that, with these technological advances, are able to compete from a cost of goods standpoint with Asian and Indian CMOs that have always been the low-cost option for companies, the go-to option in many cases. We're now being able to compete with those, again, with excellent technology in improving the yields and shortening the timelines, reducing the labor cost, and also preserving, as Jeff mentioned, the supply chain, which we saw massively disrupted back in COVID days and still can be a major issue with manufacturing.
You know, you talk about innovation and technology, and something I don't know if you've thought a lot about, but artificial intelligence is popping up almost in every industry these days. So talk a little bit about what you see as to how AI can be utilized in the CDMO process or in the advanced manufacturing process, either Jeff or Darryl.
So there are a lot of ways that we see that are being touted, but none of which have really gone through the ringer and been tested. But there are some things that look extremely promising and are not just hype. The developability assessment that I talked to you before is one of them, where they can use AI and machine learning to predict folding of proteins, immunogenicity, and manufacturability of proteins. So that's a real computational analysis method that is available today, uses AI, and is something that will help us make sure that we're working on the right molecule. The other interesting one is using digital twins in the manufacturing process, where if you know the manufacturing process, the upstream or downstream process, and you have data that you can feed into a computational analysis, then that AI can then predict with a digital twin scenario what it will look like if you tweak certain parameters, and will give you an analysis of how you can not, or how you can improve the critical quality attributes that you're looking to improve or maintain. And those are two very good examples of how AI is going to help us reduce costs and improve quality and improve efficiency.
I'll throw another one in there. There's something that's been working, or people have been working on in manufacturing for decades now, called process analytical technology, or PAT. And PAT is basically measuring critical quality attributes of your product in the bioreactor real time as the product is being produced by the cells in the bioreactor. and then using those measurements to control the process in some way, whether it's a feed, temperature, could be how it's mixing the bioreactor or other critical process parameters. I believe with AI overlaid and maybe with historical data as well, that these process analytical technologies, which to be honest have not gained as much traction as they may have, I believe that this might enable those in situ analytics to better control the process, to give you better consistency and process control than without AI. So I think that's another element of AI that probably will work very well with processing these products.
It's encouraging to hear both of you understand the implications of this innovative and new technology and how it might be able to be applied in Capitol Biologics. So I'm going to give both of you a chance now. You got your elevator pitch to sell the listeners on why they should come to Capitol Biologics for their CDMO needs. And I'm going to start with Dr. Jeffrey Hausfeld. Jeff?
So if you're an emerging biotech and your need for an IND or a phase 1 that's coming up, anywhere from 200 liter to a 500 liter bioreactor in fed batch or perfusion, if you're looking for a US-based company because you can't send your cells to China or Russia anymore, and if you're going to have any government funding, it has to be a US-based CDMO, you have a partner in a science-based, approachable CDMO that understands the entrepreneurial mindset.
Thank you, Jeff. And Darryl Sampey, the president and CEO of Capitol Biologics. Darryl, you get the final word.
But I would say we have lived the pain and suffering that you do not want to live over the decades that we built this company. We can bring companies all of these lessons learned and really help you navigate the minefield that is developing a biologics and taking a biologic from R&D to the first in human study. And I think we are a true partner. The people that work for me who've been developing our own products for years and years, they know no other way. They are not paid fee-for-service type people that I think you typically do find at CDMOs. These are people, when we have a project, they feel that project and that product is their own. They treat it no other differently than if it were their own. And I think that will be incredibly valuable to, especially to early stage companies that are trying to move through that minefield to the promised land of a successful first in human study and beyond.
Thank you, Darryl. Now, if anybody, the listeners, want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
CapitolBiologics.com. That's capital with an OL, like our nation's capital. My name's Darryl Sampey, and this is Jeff Hausfeld.
Great. Well, I want to thank Jeff Hausfeld, Darryl Sampey with BioFactura and Capitol Biologics. If you would like to encounter an experienced CDMO located right here in the BioHealth Capital Region in Frederick, please reach out to Darryl or Jeff. So thank you for being on BioTalk today.
Thank you, Rich. Pleasure as always.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.